So since the attacks in early October, I think the ball now is firmly in Israel's court. But there are several, I think, considerations that Israel is going to make before it makes an escalatory attack, for example. So the first one is support from the U.S. It needs support from the U.S. if it's going to escalate tensions with Iran, because it needs the U.S. to help it defend and intercept missiles. And I don't think Biden, for example, is going to want to see an escalation ahead of the elections. The second consideration, sorry.
Yet, Cedric, we also have news, and this may be more minor, but still I think important. The U.S. is sending over a couple of batteries of THAAD, anti-missile missiles, right, plus 100 troops. And I think, with less than 3 weeks to go ahead of the elections, whenever you've got boots on the ground, this becomes a political issue. I mean, potentially this is the part that sounds more escalatory to me, no?
Well, I think some of those missile systems are for defense interception as well, in the event that there's an escalation and there's a battery of attacks from Iran. So I think the U.S. is certainly supporting Israel in its defense and interception of this missile. But if you think about the timing is just not right for Israel to try and escalate at the moment, as it's fighting multiple fronts, right? It's fighting in Gaza. It has military operations in the West Bank. It's getting attacked by militants in Iraq and Yemen, and now it has this huge offensive front in Lebanon. So it's really stretched, and I think what Israel's going to do is going to try and bide its time a little bit. It's going to try and weaken Hezbollah as much as it can in Lebanon, and then when it feels the time is right, will probably pivot and turn its attention to Iran. At that point, it's going to decide whether it wants to do a kind of swift attack, as you mentioned, which then escalates but then de-escalates very quickly, or it could have an attack which is a little bit more escalatory, more provocative, and result in a tit-for-tat exchange.
So given how it's broadened, that's pretty obvious, right, and potentially even escalated, are you surprised that oil is not even higher?
Well, that's really interesting. So there's a geopolitical risk premium on oil, and we've seen that. But the challenge has been that the market seems to be pricing in two major dynamics. The first one is that there's going to be that cooler heads prevail. Right, so that there's not going to be a huge broadening of the conflict. So Israel has been in some form of conflict for about a year now, and we haven't seen huge escalation in tensions to the degree that would send oil much higher. So I think the geopolitical risk premium from a market perspective is not pricing in the worst case scenario. But then from a fundamental perspective, there's ample supply coming online and slightly weaker demand. So if you look at some of the forecasts of our own, we expect about 180,000 barrels of oil coming online in the next few months as OPEC Plus, especially from OPEC Plus, as they essentially increase output and production. If you look at OPEC, their own forecast, it's much larger. And that's in addition to oil supply coming online from non-OPEC members such as the U.S. and Brazil, for example. Then from a demand side, essentially we see slower growth in China, which is very energy intensive. We see slower growth in the U.S. And so the combination of supply and demand means that those fundamentals aren't that supportive for the oil market.